Have you ever noticed how the people who hurt you the most are often the ones who would never tolerate the same behavior from you? They betray, they disrespect, they cross every boundary you set. And yet, when it's time to face consequences, they expect your understanding, your compassion, your endless mercy. Meanwhile, if you made even 1/10 of their mistakes, they'd never let you forget it. They don't forgive. They keep score. They hold grudges like precious heirlooms. But you're supposed to be the bigger person, right? That's where the trap lies. You've been programmed to believe that forgiveness is always noble, that letting things go makes you spiritually evolved, that mercy is the hallmark of a good person. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. Unconditional forgiveness is not enlightenment. It's self-destruction dressed up as virtue. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives refusing to see. He said, "A man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good." Read that again. Being good all the time, forgiving everyone, turning the other cheek endlessly, this doesn't make you saint. It makes you a target. Do you know why? Because the people who exploit your forgiveness aren't confused about what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. They test you, push boundaries, hurt you, and then watch carefully to see if you'll accept it. And every time you forgive them without consequence, you're not teaching them mercy. You're teaching them that you're weak, that you can be used, that your boundaries are negotiable. Think about it. That friend who always cancels on you but expects you to drop everything when they need something. That partner who disrespects you in public but cries and apologizes in private, only to do it again next week. That family member who criticizes everything you do but demands your support for their choices. They all have something in common. They would never forgive you for doing the same to them. Never. This is the psychological trap of asymmetric forgiveness. You're playing by rules they don't even acknowledge. You're extending grace to people who see grace as weakness. And the cruelest part? They don't respect you more for your forgiveness. They respect you less. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, the dark parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. But there's another shadow at play here, the shadow of false virtue. You tell yourself you're forgiving because you're compassionate, evolved, spiritual. But dig deeper. Are you really forgiving out of strength? Or are you forgiving because you're terrified of conflict, afraid of being alone, desperate to be seen as good? Real forgiveness comes from power, not from fear. When you forgive from a position of strength, it's a conscious choice to release something that no longer serves you. But when you forgive from weakness, from neediness, from the terror of abandonment, you're not forgiving at all. You're surrendering. You're signing a contract that says, "You can hurt me without consequence." And here's what most people don't realize. The act of forgiving someone who would never extend the same mercy to you creates a profound energetic imbalance. You're constantly depleting yourself to maintain relationships with people who are parasitic by nature. They take your forgiveness and see it as permission to hurt you again. Because why wouldn't they? There's no cost to their behavior. You've made it free. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was advocating for reality. He understood that power dynamics exist whether you acknowledge them or not. And in every relationship where one person always forgives and the other always transgresses, there is a power imbalance. The transgressor has all the power. And the forgiver is slowly disappearing piece by piece, becoming smaller with every unreciprocated mercy. So now, stop and think. Who in your life takes your forgiveness while holding your smallest mistakes against you forever? Who demands understanding they never offer? Who expects you to be endlessly patient while they show you none? These are not relationships. These are extractions, and you're the resource being mined until there's nothing left. But why do we do this? Why do we keep forgiving people who hurt us? What drives this compulsive need to be merciful to those who show us no mercy? The answer lies deeper than you think, in the very way you've been conditioned to see yourself. And that is what we will talk about now. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and join our community of truth seekers. Thank you for your support. Let me tell you what nobody wants to admit. Your forgiveness addiction is a form of control. Not control over others, control over how others see you. You're so desperate to be perceived as good, kind, understanding, that you sacrifice your own dignity at the altar of other people's opinions. Sigmund Freud would call this the tyranny of the superego, that internalized voice of authority that demands you be perfect, selfless, endlessly giving. But Machiavelli would call it something else. Strategic stupidity. Because every time you forgive someone who would never forgive you, you're not being virtuous. You're being naive. And in the brutal economy of human relationships, naivety is expensive. You think your forgiveness makes you strong? Let me challenge that. True strength isn't in how much you can endure. It's in knowing when to say, enough. It's in having the spine to walk away from people who continuously disrespect you. It's in understanding that some bridges are meant to burn because they only lead to places that destroy you. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." So let's understand this. When someone hurts you and you rush to forgive them, what exactly are you protecting? Their feelings, or your own fear of being seen as unforgiving, harsh, or, God forbid, difficult? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You forgive not because you're compassionate, but because you're afraid. Afraid of being alone, afraid of conflict, afraid that if you set real consequences, people will leave. And they might. But here's the question. Are people who only stay because you tolerate their mistreatment really people you want in your life? Machiavelli understood that in any relationship, political, personal, familial, respect is earned through boundaries, not through permissiveness. When you set a boundary and someone crosses it, that's data. That's them telling you exactly who they are. And if you forgive them without consequence, you're telling them exactly who you are, someone who doesn't actually enforce their own standards. Think about the people in your life who command genuine respect. Are they the ones who forgive everything? Or are they the ones who have clear limits, who don't tolerate disrespect, who show you through their actions that their peace is not negotiable? You know the answer. There's a psychological phenomenon called intermittent reinforcement, where unpredictable rewards create the strongest behavioral conditioning. This is why toxic people cycle between hurting you and apologizing. The apology becomes meaningless because it's just part of the pattern. And your forgiveness, it's the reward that keeps the cycle spinning. You're not helping them grow, you're enabling them to stay exactly as they are, because growth requires discomfort, consequences, loss. And if you keep cushioning their fall with your forgiveness, they never hit the ground hard enough to learn. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about projection. Jung's concept of projection explains how we attribute our own unconscious feelings to others. When you forgive people who hurt you, you're often projecting your own capacity for remorse onto them. You think, if I hurt someone, I'd feel terrible and try to change. So you assume they feel the same, but they don't. Some people simply don't have your conscience, your empathy, your internal compass. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the difference between how people should live and how they actually live. He argued that the person who acts according to ideals in a world that doesn't share them will be destroyed by those who act according to reality. Your forgiveness is an ideal. Their exploitation is reality, and reality wins every time. This isn't cynicism, this is clarity. And clarity, though painful, is liberating, because once you see that your forgiveness is being weaponized against you, you can make a different choice. You can stop being available for people who would never be available for you in the same circumstances. Here's a test. Imagine the roles reversed. Imagine you did to them what they've done to you. Would they forgive you? Would they even listen to your explanation? Or would they cut you off, badmouth you to others, make you the villain in their story? You already know the answer. You've always known it. You just didn't want to admit it because admission requires action. And action requires you to do the hardest thing you've ever done. Stop being nice to people who are cruel to you. Stop extending mercy to those who show you none. Stop forgiving behavior you would never commit. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote about the importance of meaning in suffering. But he also understood that not all suffering is meaningful. Some suffering is simply the result of poor boundaries and allowing others to treat you badly. That suffering teaches you nothing except that you don't value yourself enough to demand better. Your forgiveness should be earned, not assumed. It should come after genuine change, not just empty apologies. It should be reciprocal, not one-sided, and most importantly, it should never be given at the expense of your own self-respect. Machiavelli said, "The injury that is to be done to a man ought to be of such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge." This sounds harsh until you understand what it means in the context of personal relationships. It means, if you're going to forgive someone, make absolutely certain they understand the gravity of what they did and that there will be real consequences if they do it again. Because if they don't fear the loss of your presence in their life, they don't value it. The people who truly value you don't need multiple chances to treat you well. They don't need repeated forgiveness for the same transgressions. They get it right because they care enough to try. Everyone else is just testing how much they can get away with. And here's the deepest truth. By constantly forgiving people who hurt you, you're betraying yourself. Every time, you're choosing their comfort over your dignity. You're choosing false peace over authentic boundaries. You're choosing to be liked over being respected. And that internal betrayal creates a wound that no external relationship can ever heal. So what's the alternative? What does it look like to stop forgiving people who would never forgive you? In the next part, we'll explore the path to reclaiming your power, setting real consequences, and becoming the kind of person who is respected rather than used. Get ready, because this transformation will cost you relationships, but it will save your soul. It's no use understanding all of this intellectually if in practice you continue accepting apologies that mean nothing. If you keep letting people back in who've shown you exactly who they are. If you keep being merciful to those who mistake your mercy for weakness. Awareness without action is just another form of self-deception. The transformation begins with a single decision. From this moment forward, forgiveness must be earned, not freely given. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. It makes you someone who finally values themselves enough to demand reciprocity. Machiavelli taught that the wise leader must be like the fox and the lion, the fox to recognize traps, the lion to frighten wolves. You've been the fox, seeing the traps but walking into them anyway out of some misguided sense of virtue. Now you must become the lion. You must be willing to show teeth when your boundaries are crossed. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. When you stop forgiving people who repeatedly hurt you, they will call you unforgiving. When you set consequences, they'll call you cruel. When you walk away from toxic dynamics, they'll say you've changed, and not in a good way. They'll paint themselves as victims of your newfound coldness. Let them. Because their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their narrative is not your burden, and their inability to manipulate you anymore is not your problem. This is the cost of self-respect. You will be misunderstood by people who only understood you as long as you were useful to them. Carl Jung understood that individuation, becoming your true self, requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to say no when you've always said yes. It requires you to be firm where you've been flexible. It requires you to prioritize your peace over their convenience. And this process is lonely because you're going against decades of conditioning that taught you your worth lies in your niceness. But here's what nobody tells you. Niceness without boundaries isn't niceness. It's cowardice dressed up as compassion. Real kindness knows when to withdraw. Real love knows when to let consequences teach what forgiveness cannot. Real strength knows when to walk away. So let's get practical. How do you actually stop forgiving people who would never forgive you? First, you identify them. Make a list. Who in your life has a pattern of hurting you, apologizing, and then hurting you again? Who demands your understanding but shows you none? Who takes your forgiveness for granted? Write their names down. Look at them. Really see what you've been tolerating. Second, you categorize the damage. Some people make mistakes. Some people have patterns. Mistakes deserve forgiveness. Patterns deserve distance. The person who snapped at you once during a stressful time, that's different from the person who regularly disrespects you and expects you to accept it. Learn to distinguish between human error and intentional exploitation. Third, you communicate boundaries. Once, not twice, not 5 times. Once. What you did hurt me. If it happens again, there will be consequences, and then, and this is crucial, you follow through. Because a boundary without enforcement is just a suggestion, and suggestions get ignored. Machiavelli wrote, "Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot." Applied to personal relationships, this means either maintain good, respectful relationships with people or cut them off completely when they prove themselves toxic. The middle ground, where you keep semi-toxic people around and keep forgiving them, is where you slowly die. Fourth, you embrace the discomfort of being the bad guy. When you stop forgiving without consequence, people who benefited from your weakness will revolt. They'll tell others you've become harsh. They'll say you're holding grudges. They'll play the victim beautifully. And you know what? That's fine. Let them perform for an audience. Meanwhile, you're reclaiming your life. Remember what Jung said. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain of setting boundaries, of disappointing people, of being misunderstood. This is the price of waking up. And it's worth every uncomfortable moment, because on the other side of this pain is something you've never experienced: genuine self-respect. Fifth, you get comfortable with consequences being permanent. Not every relationship deserves a second chance. Not every apology deserves acceptance. Some people need to be removed from your life entirely, not put on probation. This sounds harsh until you realize that toxic people don't change because you give them multiple chances. They change when losing you becomes more painful than changing themselves. And sometimes they don't change at all, and that's information. Here's where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes surgical. He understood that appearing weak invites attack, while appearing strong invites respect. When you forgive repeatedly, you appear weak, regardless of your actual character. You're signaling that you can be hurt without repercussion. But when you set clear consequences and enforce them, you signal something different. I value myself enough to not tolerate this. Sixth, you replace forgiveness with boundaries. Instead of saying, "I forgive you," every time someone hurts you, try this: "I've heard your apology. Now, I need to see changed behavior over time before we can move forward." This shifts the burden from your forgiveness to their transformation. And watch how quickly you see who's actually sorry versus who's just sorry they got called out. Arthur Schopenhauer said, "Compassion for animals is intimately associated with goodness of character, and it may be confidently asserted that he who is cruel to animals cannot be a good man. But I would add, he who is cruel to himself by tolerating cruelty from others also cannot claim goodness." True compassion includes self-compassion, and self-compassion means protecting yourself from people who hurt you repeatedly. Seventh, you accept that some people will never understand. They'll never grasp why you won't forgive them one more time. They'll never comprehend that their apologies have become meaningless. They'll die thinking you were the problem. And you have to be okay with that, because their understanding is not required for your healing. This transformation will feel selfish at first. You've been conditioned to see self-protection as selfishness. But Machiavelli distinguished between virtuous selfishness and destructive selfishness. Protecting your peace, enforcing boundaries, refusing to be endlessly merciful to those who abuse your mercy. This is virtuous selfishness. This is the kind of self-interest that doesn't harm others. It simply stops allowing others to harm you. Friedrich Nietzsche talked about master morality versus slave morality. Slave morality says you must always forgive, always be humble, always turn the other cheek. Master morality says you define your own values and enforce them without apology. You've been living in slave morality, seeking approval for your endless forgiveness. It's time to embrace master morality. These are my standards. Meet them or lose me. Eighth, you rebuild your life around people who actually reciprocate. As you remove those who exploit your forgiveness, you create space for those who value you, enough not to need it. You'll be amazed at how peaceful life becomes when you're surrounded by people who respect you enough not to continuously hurt you. And here's the liberation. When you stop forgiving people who would never forgive you, you stop living in a constant state of mild betrayal. You stop carrying the weight of other people's moral failings. You stop being the emotional dumping ground for people who refuse to do their own inner work. Machiavelli's ultimate lesson wasn't about being cruel, it was about being real. He looked at human nature without the rose-colored glasses of wishful thinking. He saw that some people are predators, some are prey, and some know how to protect themselves without becoming predators. You're learning to be the third type. But what happens after you make these changes? What does life look like when you finally stopped being merciful to the merciless? In the final part, we'll explore the rebirth that comes when you choose yourself over fake peace, when you value your dignity over others' approval, and when you finally become someone who is respected rather than used. When you stop forgiving people who would never forgive you, something extraordinary happens. First comes the guilt. It washes over you like a wave, telling you you're being cruel, unforgiving, not spiritual enough. But gradually, beneath that guilt, something else emerges. Relief. Relief that you're no longer carrying other people's sins. Relief that you're no longer pretending toxic relationships are healthy. Relief that you finally value yourself enough to say no more. And in that relief, you begin to breathe again. Really breathe. For the first time in years, maybe decades. The people who are draining you, they'll be angry at first. They'll try to guilt you back into the old dynamic. But when they realize you're serious, they'll either change or disappear. And both outcomes are victories. Either they finally become the person they should have been all along, or they remove themselves from your life, doing you a favor you didn't have the strength to do yourself. Machiavelli understood that true power comes not from being loved by everyone, but from being respected by those who matter. And respect only comes when you respect yourself enough to enforce boundaries. When you stop being a doormat, you stop attracting people who wipe their feet on you. You'll lose relationships, but you'll find yourself. You'll lose people who never really valued you, but you'll gain self-respect. You'll lose the comfort of being liked, but you'll gain the freedom of being real. And here's what nobody tells you about this transformation. The people who stay in your life after you set these boundaries become your true tribe. They're the ones who never needed repeated forgiveness because they got it right the first time. They're the ones who respect your limits because they have their own. They're the ones who celebrate your strength rather than mourning your weakness. This is the rebirth Machiavelli spoke of. Not a rebirth into naive goodness, but into wise strength. You're no longer someone who can be exploited. You're someone who knows their worth and demands the world recognize it too. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You're choosing to become someone who values themselves. Someone who understands that forgiveness is a gift, not a guarantee. Someone who knows that mercy without boundaries is just another form of self-destruction. So now I ask you, are you ready to stop forgiving people who would never extend the same mercy to you? Are you ready to set real consequences and enforce them? Are you ready to be called unforgiving by people who never had to forgive you because you never hurt them the way they hurt you? If this message resonated with you, write in the comments, "I choose self-respect." Let's see how many here are ready to stop being merciful to the merciless and start being loyal to themselves. Today, we learned from Niccolò Machiavelli that wisdom lies not in endless forgiveness, but in understanding when mercy becomes self-betrayal, and from Carl Jung that true individuation requires us to disappoint those who only valued us for our weakness. If these insights sparked a moment of clarity for you, hit the like button to share this wisdom with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to join our community where we explore ideas that transform how we see ourselves and the world. Together, we're building a space for those brave enough to face uncomfortable truths about human nature and power. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these life-changing psychological insights to those who need them most. Until we meet again, remember Machiavelli's wisdom. Being good all the time in a world that isn't will destroy you. Carry these insights forward and choose yourself first. See you in the next video, where we'll explore even deeper truths about power, respect, and personal sovereignty. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational, and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.